In the beginning, God created diversity. The Bible doesn't quite put it that way, but it's there to see. The opening chapter of the book of Genesis is brimming over with it. God creates the world, and in it all kinds of things, everything in the plural. God creates waters and seasons. God creates one light to rule the day, and another kind of light to rule the night. God creates fruit trees and trees bearing seed of every kind. God creates swarms of living creatures, every kind that live in the sea and every kind that flies through the sky. God creates the wild animals and the things that creep on the ground and every kind of cattle. And then God creates humankind in God's image, and God blesses the whole creation. God creates all this wondrous diversity and calls it good in all its abundance and potential, in all its glory and splendor. God blesses it all and calls it good. In fact, these opening verses of Genesis give the feeling that God had a ball creating these different kinds of living things. The diversity of creation is God's delight. It is God's joy. It is God's gift. Each and every one of us has a precious and beautiful place in God's magnificent creation. Oh, sure, but much of the Bible is about how it's all gone sour. Seems like God's humans don't take as much delight in diversity as does God. You know, Cain and Abel, the Tower of Babel, Joseph and his brothers, the Israelites and the Egyptians, Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar. It's all there. It's a pretty sorry picture of humankind, all created in God's image, but turning away from God's gift and turning toward enmity and violence. Not long ago, near where I live in Los Angeles, I drove past a protest demonstration. I'm used to seeing them in support of the president, or protesting the war, or urging a living wage, and so forth. But this one was different, and it took me some moments to realize what I was seeing. Clean-cut young kids, all dressed in white shirts and black trousers, holding signs saying something I couldn't make out about the U.S. government. Then I got to the one with a man's name and photo, describing him as a hero of the white race. And as my blood ran cold, I passed the next group of these young people, each lifting an arm in the Nazi salute. I was appalled, not just because they were affirming a history of violent hatred and genocide, but because they were protesting the very diversity of God's people and their faith. As I drove on, shaking, tears coming, and although many might say that I was alone in that car, I believe that God was with me. I felt that surely God's heart was breaking as well, and God was sharing my tears. I firmly believe that as people of faith, we have a special vocation and calling to lead the world in embracing diversity. I believe that we have a witness to make to the fact that we are all created in the image of God, that we are, in fact, sisters and brothers. And I believe that the future of the world depends on our leadership and our faithfulness. We live in a world whose diversity is pluralistic, multicultural, and multi-religious. A world of interconnected differences. Our diversity has become more global and more local every year. You know, right now in just one county in Georgia, 26 languages are spoken by school-age children. Maybe you're not surprised. Most of us now live in multi-ethnic and multicultural communities. Many of us live in multi-faith families. Many of our kids have best friends of a different race or faith. For many of us, our closest personal relationships have become something of a laboratory in which we learn to feel enlarged, not threatened by difference. This is something of a lifelong faith quest for me. After I graduated high school and before starting college, I was privileged to spend a year as an exchange student in a program sponsored by my local Methodist church. I will be forever grateful to that church for their vision and their commitment to that program for youth. From a fairly homogeneous white Protestant world, I went to Marseille in the south of France. I lived with a Roman Catholic family who embraced me as their daughter. We could hardly have been more different on the surface. I was a tall, skinny redhead trying to learn the language and the customs. They were of Greek and Italian descent, short, stocky, and exuberantly Mediterranean. They believed in saints and feast days and ate fish on Fridays. It was all new to me, and nothing could have been more exotic than walking through that great port city and seeing all kinds of people: Armenians, Moroccans, Tunisians, Ethiopians, Greeks, Congolese, Turks, Lebanese, Gypsies. That experience blew my mind in the best possible way and opened my heart to the wonder of humankind and to the incredible diversity of God's world. Humankind, all created in the image of God. There's a beautiful verse in the Quran that expresses this same truth. It begins, "O humanity, truly we, God, created you from a male and a female, and made you into nations and tribes that you might know each other." God created our diversity that we might know one another. What a powerful foundational message this is for our post-9/11 world. In this world of fear and suspicion and violence, God calls us to be signs of peace, sacraments, people who have the vocation of unity, as Thomas Merton, that great Catholic mystic and teacher, put it. For this, we will need a pluralistic heart, a heart which recognizes the spark of God in others and is eager to reach out in understanding and respect. It doesn't mean that we cannot be different. It does not mean that we must abandon our deeply held beliefs. Understanding and respect begin when we reach to see beyond our differences, when we are, at last, and through the grace of God, able to see ourselves in the other and the other in ourselves. Let me close with a familiar Jewish midrash, a teaching story, in which the teacher asks, "How can we know when the night has ended and the day has begun?" A student answers, "You know the night has ended when you can distinguish a goat from a sheep." A second suggests, "You know the night has ended when you can distinguish between an olive tree and a fig tree." Still the teacher shook his head. Immediately the disciples began to argue with one another. "Answer your own question, teacher, for we cannot think of another response." Then the teacher spoke. When you look into the eyes of another human being and see a brother or a sister, then you will know that the night has ended and the day has begun. In the beginning, God created diversity. And in the beginning of each new day, may the bright and morning star, Christ Jesus, bless us with a heart big enough to embrace that diversity with thanksgiving. And bless us as well with the vocation of unity, that we may be sacraments and signs of peace to share in God's joy and bring wholeness and healing to our world.